The man did not look at her when he said it. Orrin Task stood at the far end of the Miles City platform with his arms folded and his eyes fixed on something past her left shoulder, as though looking straight at her might cost him money. He was shorter than his letters had suggested. He had a patchy beard and a mouth that seemed to rest in a sneer. Behind him, 3 of his friends leaned on the rail and watched and grinned and said nothing at all, and the nothing was the worst part of it, because it told Nell Vardy they had known this was coming before she ever stepped down from the car. Too stubborn, Orrin said, to no one in particular. Too much trouble. Send her and the boy back. He did not say it to her. He said it to the marriage broker standing at his elbow, the way a man speaks about a crate that arrived dented. Nell did not cry. She had used up what she had of that somewhere east of Bismarck, in a car that smelled of cold smoke and wet wool, when Micah had asked her for the 4th time that morning whether they were nearly there, and she had not known how to answer him. She stood on that platform in the last week of October with the wind coming down off the high ground and cutting straight through a coat that had been good 6 years ago, and she made no sound. But her hands went white at the knuckles on the handle of the one bag she owned. Micah pressed against her side. He was 6 years old and small for it, dark-haired like her, with his dead father's gray eyes, and he had been watching the men across the platform with the careful stillness of a child who has already learned that grown men talking about him rarely ends well. He did not ask what was happening. He leaned into her hip and waited. That was the thing about Micah. He knew how to wait. She had answered the advertisement in a Sandusky paper in July. She had not been foolish about it. She knew what a mail-order marriage was. It was a bargain, and she had gone into it with her eyes open, the way she had gone into everything since her husband walked out of a rented room in Ohio when Micah was 9 months old and did not come back. Not dramatically. Not with a fight. Just gone. On a Tuesday, his side of the wardrobe emptied with a neatness that still unsettled her when she thought of it. She had survived 3 years in her sister's back room, taking in mending until her fingers ached, eating less than she served her son so there would be enough on his plate. She had survived being a woman of 30 with a child and no husband in a town where the neighbors went quiet when she came up the walk. She was not naive, she was tired, which is a different thing. Orrin Task had written her 4 letters over 5 weeks. They were not warm letters, but they were plain enough. He wanted a woman to keep his house. He had a small outfit north of town. He was not a refined man, but he was steady, or he had let her believe it. He had never once written that a child was a difficulty. He said it on the platform. Mrs. Delphi Rowe was the broker, a wide, capable woman in a black coat who wore the expression of somebody who spends her life managing other people's disasters. She took Nell into the station office and sat her down by the stove and did not insult her with sympathy. "He is not a bad man, Mrs. Rowe began. "I do not need your reading of him," Nell said. "Not unkindly. Clearly, I need to know whether there is another arrangement. I am not going back east." Mrs. Rowe looked at her over the top of her spectacles for a long moment. There was something in the look. Not respect yet. The beginning of it. "There is one," she said, "but I would be doing you a disservice if I did not tell you that 3 women before you have already turned it down. Tell me anyway." Mrs. Rowe opened the leather satchel on her lap and took out a folded letter, worn at the creases as though it had been handled and set aside more than once. She laid it on the table between them. "His name is Jonas Ridley," she said. "He runs cattle up in the Antler Creek basin, 40 miles northwest up past the breaks. The road in is rough in good weather, and in winter it can close for a week at a stretch. He has been up there alone for 7 years. She paused. Of the 3 women, 2 never got past reading the letter. The third went out for 9 days and came back on foot. "What is wrong with him?" Nell said. Hard to say exactly. He does not talk. The place is genuinely remote and the work is hard, and he is not an easy man. Mrs. Rowe said it carefully, the way you say a true thing that might be taken wrong. But he has never been cruel that anyone has recorded, and he has never lifted a hand to anybody. He has just been alone so long, I believe he has forgotten there was another way to be. Does he know about my son? I wrote to him about your son. He sent back one line. It is in there. Nell unfolded the letter. The hand was not elegant. It was the hand of a man who writes when he has something to say and not otherwise, blocky and square with no flourish in it. 4 paragraphs. 3 of them were practical to the point of bluntness. What the ranch needed. What the Winters did. What he could offer in provision and in wages if she preferred to be paid rather than married. The 4th paragraph was 1 sentence, and she read it 3 times. I cannot promise you easy days, but I will keep you and your boy warm and fed, and I will not lie to you about anything. She set the letter down. She looked at Micah, who had fallen asleep in the chair by the stove, with his head tipped against the wall and his mouth a little open. She thought about Orrin Task saying trouble through a door that was not quite shut. She thought about $14. She thought about the eastbound train and her sister's back room and the particular way Sandusky would receive her. She thought about Micah growing up knowing, in the wordless way children always know, that his mother had come home beaten. I will go, she said. Mrs. Rowe did not look surprised. She looked, if anything, quietly resigned, the way a person looks when she has given somebody every fact she has and it is now out of her hands. I will send word tonight, she said. He will send a wagon. The wagon came 2 days later, and it was not Jonas Ridley who drove it. It was an old hand named Harmon Teal, 60 or better, weathered down to gristle, with a white beard cropped close and the unhurried manner of a man who has spent his life outdoors and expects to go on doing it. He loaded her bag without comment. He handed Micah up onto the bench with a steadiness that suggested he had done it for other children in other years, and he said nothing at all until they were 2 miles clear of town. Colder up there, he said then, to the horses more than to her. I know, Nell said. He glanced sideways. You ain't been up there. I know it is colder. Not how cold. There is a difference. He was quiet a moment. Fair enough, he said, and offered nothing else. They were 2 days on the road with a night at a stage stop where the stove smoked and the coffee was terrible. Micah sat between them with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes moving steadily over the country. The long, flat runs giving way to broken ground, sage and rock coming up through the grass. The sky getting wider and more serious the further north they went. He asked Teal twice about the horses, and the old man answered both times without shortening the answer for a child's age, which Nell noticed. Micah noticed it too. He sat up a little straighter afterward. The road into the Antler Creek basin was exactly what Mrs. Rowe had described. Nell gripped the edge of the bench and kept her face still, because Micah was watching her the way he always watched her when a thing got difficult. He was checking. He needed to know whether to be frightened. She kept her face calm, and he settled. The ranch came into view late in the afternoon, when the light had gone flat and gray and the cold had taken on a specific weight that pressed against every uncovered inch of skin. It was not what she had expected. She was not sure what she had expected. Something more fortified, perhaps. Something built to keep the world out. Instead, it was a cluster of buildings set against the base of a long ridge, plain and unadorned, the house bigger than she had imagined, the barn and the sheds placed with the logic of a man who had thought hard about wind and water and where the drifts would sit. It was not pretty. It was not neglected either. Things were maintained. That meant something. Jonas Ridley was standing in the yard. He was tall. He was built the way men get who work outdoors in cold country, stripped of anything that is not useful, heavy through the shoulders, with hands that hung open at his sides. He wore no hat. His hair was dark and long enough to touch his collar and going gray at the temples, and his beard was full and had not been trimmed with any particular vanity. And his coat was a heavy thing of leather and hide that had been mended more than once at the elbow. His face was not unfriendly. It was not friendly either. It was the face of a man who has learned not to commit until he knows what he is committing to. He looked at the wagon. He looked at Teal. He looked at her. Then he looked at Micah, and something crossed his face that she could not name. Not warmth. Closer to recognition, as though the boy standing there confirmed a thing he had not let himself get ready for. "Mrs. Vardy," he said. His voice was lower than she expected and came slow, as though each word had been weighed. "Mr. Ridley." She climbed down before Teal could offer a hand and lifted Micah down after her. Jonas looked at the boy again. "How old?" he said. 6, Nell said. "His name is Micah." Jonas looked at him a moment in silence. Micah, cold and tired and taking the measure of this tall stranger the way he took the measure of most unfamiliar men, said nothing at all. "You hungry?" Jonas said. He was speaking to the boy. Micah glanced up at his mother, then back. "Yes, sir," he said. Jonas nodded once and turned for the house. "Come in then." The kitchen was warm because the stove had been running a good while, and it smelled of wood smoke and beans and something salted. The table was plain scrubbed pine. There were 3 chairs set around it, and she counted them and said nothing, and filed the fact away where she kept the things that mattered. He had put out 3 chairs. He was not a man who showed you things. Sometimes things showed anyway. She set her bag down and took Micah's coat and began the quiet business of settling a tired child, getting him to the table, getting hot food into him, keeping the talk at whatever level let him keep his dignity. She was good at this, not from ease but from long practice. Jonas watched her from the corner of the kitchen without appearing to watch, filling the pot, staying out of the way, doing the hosting without hosting that men who live alone fall back on because they do not know the other version. Micah ate with the focused seriousness of a very hungry boy. Halfway through, he looked up at Jonas, who was still standing. "Are you not eating?" Micah said. "Ate earlier." "Why? Did not know what hour you would get here." Micah considered that. "That is all right," he said gravely. "You can eat now if you want. We do not mind." Something moved in Jonas Ridley's face. Not a smile. The country around one shifted. He sat down. He ate. Later, when Micah was asleep in a small room off the main bedroom that had plainly been used for storage until recently and had been cleared out and fitted with a narrow cot, Nell came back to the kitchen. She had taken her hair down to re-braid it, and she was halfway through when she came through the door and found Jonas still at the table with a cup of coffee, and she stopped, self-conscious in a way she did not usually permit herself. "Sorry," she said. "I did not know you were." "It is your house," he said. "Part of it." She sat down across from him and finished the braid, because there was nothing else to be done about it, and she refused to retreat and deal with her hair like a girl of 15 caught at something. He looked at the table. "You do not have to stay," he said, not cruelly, flatly. "I beg your pardon." "What happened in town with Task?" He turned the cup in his hands. "Mrs. Rowe wrote to me." "I know what it was. You do not have to stay up here because you have nowhere else. That is a bad reason." Nell looked at him a long moment. "And what would be a good one?" He met her eyes. "Because you read that letter and thought it might work." She was quiet. The stove ticked. The wind had come up and was moving around the corners of the house with a low, workmanlike persistence. "I read that letter," she said, "and I thought you were the first person in this business who told me the truth. That is not nothing." He held her eyes a moment longer and then looked away. "I am not easy to be around," he said. "You should know that going in." "I am not particularly easy either," she said. Orrin Task told half of Miles City so. Jonas made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, put down before it got out. I heard. I imagine you did. She wrapped both hands around her cup. I am not here because you are easy, Mr. Ridley. I am here because your letter told me what the situation actually was instead of what you thought I wanted to hear. I find that more useful than charm. He looked at her again, and there was something in his expression she could not quite place. It was not hostility, and it was not warmth. It sat between the two in a way that felt more honest than either. You cook, he said. Yes, mend, obviously, livestock, not cattle. Chickens and a milk cow when I was a girl. I am willing to learn the rest. He nodded, taking that in. Fences want work come spring, the south run. Teal is getting on and his shoulder is not right. I can help with fences. He looked faintly startled. You know fencing. I know how to learn, she said. That is what I am telling you. The silence after that was not uncomfortable exactly. It was the silence of two people revising something. The boy, he said finally. He is not. Is he sick? He is quiet. He is not sick. He is careful. There is a difference. She paused. He has been in enough rooms where quiet was the right call. He will talk your ear off once he decides it is safe. Decides how. He watches, she said. He watches how a man handles a horse. He watches how a man talks when he thinks the boy is not listening. He watches whether what a man says and what a man does line up. She looked at him. He is 6. He is not simple. That is a good deal for a boy to carry, Jonas said. Yes, she said. It is. She did not elaborate. He did not ask. But the quality of his attention shifted, and he looked toward the hall where the small room was, and the look had weight in it. Get some sleep, he said. Morning starts early. How early? Before it is light. All right. She stood. Mr. Ridley. He looked up. Thank you, she said, for setting out 3 chairs. He did not say anything. He did not look away either. She was awake before he knocked. She had always risen early. The low, functional kind of worry she had learned to run on had a way of surfacing before dawn. She was dressed and in the kitchen building up the stove when she heard him stop outside her door, heard the small pause, heard him decide not to knock. When he came in from the yard 30 minutes later, the coffee was made. He stood in the doorway a moment. He looked at the pot. He looked at her. I did not ask you to do that, he said. No, she agreed. You did not. She handed him a cup. He took it. He sat at one end of the table and she sat at the other, and they drank their coffee in the gray before dawn with the fire building behind the stove door, and it was not comfortable exactly. But it was not uncomfortable either. It was the cautious, provisional peace of two people deciding, without saying so, to give the thing a fair run. The first week was an education, and not only for her, though Jonas would not have said so. He showed her the rhythms of the place with the efficiency of a man who has explained things to himself for years and is now recalibrating for an audience. She asked questions that were specific and practical, which seemed either to surprise him or to relieve him. She could not always tell which. She did not complain about the cold. She did not ask for the work to be made lighter. She made mistakes. She miscounted feed twice. She nearly went down on the ice on the path to the water trough. She badly misjudged how long it would take to mend a section of harness he had asked her to look at. She corrected each one without drama. He corrected her twice, briefly, and moved on. He did not belabor a thing. What she noticed was this. He was fair, not warm, not gentle, but scrupulously fair. He did not ask her to do work he would not do himself. He did not hold her early mistakes against her past their usefulness as information. When Teal came by on the 3rd day and made a remark that was not quite a joke about whether she would last the week, Jonas cut him off with 4 words. She is doing fine, Teal, and moved on. and Teal looked mildly startled and said no more about it. Jonas did not mention it afterward. He did not seem to expect her gratitude for it. He had said what was accurate and defended it because it was accurate, and that was apparently the end of the matter. Nell found this unsettling in a way she had not braced for. She had spent so long among people who withheld, who built in debts, who handed out small acknowledgments the way a miser counts coins. That plain fairness read almost like generosity. She was going to have to recalibrate. Micah was conducting his own assessment. The first 2 days he stayed near her, watching Jonas from a distance with those careful gray eyes. He did not avoid the man. He studied him. He was gathering evidence in the methodical way children do when they have learned not to trust a first impression. On the 3rd morning he followed Jonas to the barn. Nell saw it from the window and said nothing. She watched Jonas reach the barn door, register the boy behind him, and stop. He looked at Micah. Micah looked back. Then Jonas pushed the door open and went in and left it standing open behind him. Micah went through. She did not see what happened in there. But an hour later, when Jonas came back to the house for something, the boy was at his elbow saying something she could not hear. And Jonas was listening. Not performing listening. Actually listening, with that slight downward tilt of the head she had already learned meant he was paying attention. He showed me how the horses eat in winter, Micah reported at dinner. With the breathless specificity of a boy who has been given access to important information. There is no grass under the snow, so they get hay, and you have to break the ice on the water twice a day or they cannot drink enough and then they get sick and can die. Did you know that? I did know that, she said. He let me carry the bucket. He paused. It was heavy. I had to use both hands. He did not carry it for me, but he walked slow so I could keep up. Nell looked up from the pot she was stirring. That was kind of him, she said. Micah nodded. Serious. I think he is all right, he said, delivering his verdict with the finality of somebody who has spent real time reaching it. He does not talk much. But when he does it, is true things. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. When he does it, is true things. Her son had just named, at 6, the exact quality that had put her in that wagon, and he had named it more precisely than she had managed in her own head. It was Micah who found the weight. He was not snooping. He had been sent to fetch her good scissors out of the bag under the cot. And the bag was old, and the seam at the bottom had given a little, and when he lifted it something inside shifted and thudded against the floor with a sound too heavy for anything a woman carries. He got it out. It was wrapped in a wool stocking. He unwrapped it on the cot with the careful attention he gave to all new objects. It was a block of brass about the size of a brick, but shorter and thicker, with a small ring on top and a flat, faintly greenish face. There were letters stamped into one side, and numbers, and a mark he did not know. It was so heavy that when he tried to lift it in one hand, his wrist folded, and he had to catch it against his chest. He brought it to the kitchen with both arms around it like a cat. "What is this?" he said. Nell turned from the stove and went still for half a second. Then she came over and took it from him and set it on the table, and the table took the sound of it. "It is a weight," she said. "For what?" "For a scale." "Whose is it?" "Your grandfather's," she said. And then, before he could ask the next question, "Go wash. Supper is nearly on." He went. He was a boy who understood when a door had been shut, though he also understood that a shut door is not always locked, and he intended to try it again later. Jonas had been in the doorway with an armload of split wood through most of it. He put the wood down in the box. He looked at the brass block sitting on his table. He did not ask. That was the thing about him. He looked at it a good while, and then he went back out for another load, and the question sat there unasked and did not sour. It was 3 nights later that she answered it. He had left the ranch ledger on the table with a stack of bills of sale and shipping tickets piled beside it, which she had come to recognize as his way of asking for help without asking. She had been at it since supper with the lamp turned up. "I have found 3 billing errors," she said when he came in from the barn smelling of hay and cold. "And a credit from August you never collected." Silence. From the feed dealer in Shale Bend, she went on. "You overpaid in July. They owe you $4.30. I can write to them if you like." More silence. She looked up. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen with his coat half unbuttoned and an expression on his face she had not seen before. It was not quite surprise. It was the careful, wondering look of a man who has picked up something he expected to be light and has found it considerably heavier than he planned for, and is not yet sure whether that is good or bad. "I am not bad with numbers," she said. "I can see that." She waited. He crossed to the table and sat down and looked at the ledger, not to check her work. The way he looked at it told her that, to understand what she had found. He ran one finger down a column. He stopped at the credit line she had marked. $4.30, he said. 32, actually, I rounded down because I was not sure whether a discount had been applied. He looked at her. "You did not have to do this, no." She agreed. "Why did you?" She thought about it honestly. "Because it is the thing I am good at," she said. And it was sitting there, and I was sitting here. And, she stopped. "And, because I would like to be useful," she said. "Not ornamental. Not tolerated. Useful." He was quiet a long moment. "You are," he said, and got up to pour himself a cup of the coffee she had left warming. She turned back to the ledger, and then, because the lamp was low and the house was quiet and he had not asked her a single question she had not offered to answer, she said it. "My father was a territorial weighmaster." Jonas stopped with the cup halfway to the table. "Sit down," she said. "This will take a minute." He sat. "His name was Harlan Pike," she said. "He was a weighmaster and then a deputy inspector for 11 years, out of Bismarck and then out of Miles City for 2 seasons. Do you know what a weighmaster does? Tests scales. Tests and seals them," she said. "Every public scale in a territory is supposed to be tested against a certified standard once a year and sealed, and the seal is what makes a weight ticket worth anything in law." He carried a set of standards in a wooden case in the back of a buggy for 11 years. 50-pound, 25, 10, 5, and the small ones. He tested scales at grain houses and stockyards and mercantiles from one end of his district to the other. She turned the lamp down a quarter turn, not because it needed it. In 81, he tested a beam scale at a shipping pen and found it 4.5% light. That does not sound like much. On 1,000 head at 1,100 pounds a head, it is a good deal of money. And it is money that comes out of the ranchers and goes into the buyer, and the buyer's man sets the poise. My father wrote it up. He sealed the scale rejected and wrote it up. And the man who owned the scale had friends and my father did not, she said. There was an inquiry. It was found that my father's own standards were out of certification by 4 months, which was true because the office had not sent him the money to have them recertified. So the finding was thrown out and the scale was sealed passing by another man, and my father was let go in the spring. And he died 2 winters after that in a rented room in Fargo of a cough he had been ignoring for a year. Jonas said nothing. He left me a wardrobe of clothes I sold and about $90 in debts and 1 brass 50-pound standard, she said. It is the only thing he owned that could not lie. My sister said I was foolish to haul it across the country in a bag when I could have sold the brass for $6. I hauled it across the country in a bag. The stove ticked. Why? Jonas said. She was quiet a moment. Because he was right, she said. Nobody ever wrote that down anywhere, and I was not going to be the one who put it down for $6. He looked at the table for a while. "Where is it now?" he said. "Wrapped in a stocking under my son's cot." He nodded slowly, as though this were a reasonable place to keep such a thing, which, she thought later, was one of the first moments she had genuinely liked him. Then he said, "I have a thing to tell you about the ledger." "Go on." "There is a name in there. Farrow, Wick Farrow, over the east side of the basin. He owes me for 4 steers from last fall, and there is no payment recorded past the deposit." "I saw it," she said. "It is a good deal of money to be carrying." "I know." She turned around and looked at him. He was looking at the table with his jaw set in the way it went when something was working at him that he had not decided how to say. "His wife is sick," Jonas said. "Since September. They think it is consumption. Down at the doctor's." "Does he know you know about the balance?" "He knows." "And you have said nothing?" "No." "Because of his wife." He looked up then, and there was something in his face that was not defensive but was braced for it, waiting for her to tell him it was bad business, which it was, or that sentiment has no place in accounts, which was also true. She looked at him a moment and then turned back to the ledger. "I will mark it deferred," she said. "Not forgiven. Deferred, with a note and a date. That way it is documented, and he can settle in the spring without either of you having to make it a conversation." Another silence. Then, "You can do that. I have just described doing it." "Yes," she heard him breathe out. Not quite a sigh. More like something letting go. "All right," he said. She made the note. She said nothing else about it. But she filed the information carefully. Jonas Ridley, who presented to the world as a man with no soft place anywhere on him, had been quietly carrying a debt he was owed because a neighbor's wife was dying. And he had not told a soul. And he had not even told his own ledger. He had left the line blank and hoped nobody looked too close. There was something there worth knowing. December closed the basin down the way it does. Teal came up from Shale Bend with supplies twice in the first 2 weeks, and the second time he stayed for supper, which appeared to be an arrangement nobody had thought to tell her about but which she was expected to accommodate. She accommodated it. Teal ate with the appreciation of a man who has been living on his own cooking too long, and partway through he looked at her across the table and said, with a genuine surprise that was only mildly insulting, "You can cook." "I can," she said. The last one could not. "Teal," Jonas said. "I am only saying." He speared a potato. The one before her could cook but could not abide the cold. The one before that could do neither. He looked at Nell with the candid assessment of a man who has no notion of how to be tactful and decided a long time ago that this was the world's problem. "You appear to be managing both." "I am managing," she agreed. "How is the book coming?" he said to Jonas now. "She found the Farrow line." "She found it." "Good," Teal nodded. "I told you 6 years ago you wanted somebody on those books. You have too much in your head to keep it all in your head." "I have managed." "You have approximately managed," Teal said. "There is a difference." Something shifted at the other end of the table. Nell glanced at Jonas. He was looking at his plate, but the set of his mouth had changed. He was putting something down. It took her a moment to identify it as amusement, uncomfortable in a face not accustomed to wearing it. She filed that away too. The first real trouble came on a Wednesday at the end of January, and it did not arrive as a disaster. It arrived as a slow problem that became one by degrees. 2 head, a heifer and a yearling, went through a weak section of the south fence during a night of hard wind. And by the time Jonas found them gone at first light, they had been out for hours. In the Antler Creek basin in January, that was not a small thing. The nights had been dropping to the kind of cold that kills. He was saddled and gone by 6:15. He did not come back by noon. By 2 in the afternoon, Nell had made a decision. She had learned enough in 2 months to manage the barn work. She did it, all of it, methodically. Every animal fed and watered and checked. Then she went to the south run on foot, because Jonas had the one sound saddle horse and the other was lame, and she walked the fence line in the January cold looking for where it had gone. Because if he found those cattle and brought them back, there would need to be a fence to bring them back to. She found the break in half an hour, and it was worse than she had hoped. A full section down. 2 posts pulled clean out of frozen ground by what must have been the animals shoving through in the wind. She did not have the tools to reset posts in ground like that. She had wire. She had wire and her hands and 2 hours of daylight. She fixed it wrong. She knew she was fixing it wrong. It was a patch and not a repair, and it would hold only until the ground thawed and proper work could be done. But it would hold, and she made it hold, and she was back inside before the last of the light went, and she had lost the feeling in 2 fingers and in a strip along her left cheek. She was at the stove when she heard his horse. He came in with both head. They were moving stiff, but they were alive, and he got them settled before he came to the house, which she had expected. When he finally came through the kitchen door, he was white with cold, and there was ice in his beard, and he looked at her, at the stove and at the pot on the fire and at the fact that the house was warm, and then passed her out the window at the dark. "The barn work," he said. "Done, the south fence. Patched. It wants proper work in the spring. It will hold until then if we do not get another wind like that one." He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and there was something in his expression she had not seen on him before. Not gratitude exactly. More like adjustment. The look of a man revising a figure he had thought was settled. "You went out to the south line," he said. "Yes, in this. The cattle were going to need a fence. You should have waited." She turned and looked at him directly. "For what?" "You were gone. The fence wanted doing. I did it." She paused. "I am not going to apologize for being useful, Miss Ridley." He did not say anything. "Sit down," she said. "You are half frozen and the coffee is hot." He sat. He drank it with both hands around the cup, and she watched the cold work its way out of him slowly, the way it does when it has gone deep. She put food in front of him, and he ate, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the stove built itself up and the kitchen got warmer. "You have lost the feeling in that hand," he said. He was looking at her left hand, where she was still working the 2 fingers. "It is coming back." "Let me see." "It is coming back. Mrs. Vardy," she set her hand on the table. He took it in both of his, which were still cold themselves but warming, and looked at the 2 fingers, pressing gently along the length of each to check the color coming up. She watched his face while he did it. The focused attention, the small line between his brows. "You want to be more careful," he said, not looking up. "I wanted to fix the fence." "I know." He let her hand go carefully. "Thank you." It was the first time he had said it to her. Not the polite reflex people say without thinking. The deliberate kind that means a thing has actually been registered. She picked up her cup. "The heifer," she said. "Is she all right?" "She will do. She is tougher than she looks." Something moved in his face. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, "The 3 before you. I want to be clear about a thing." She waited. "They left because I made this place harder to be in than it had to be," he said. "Not because the place is hard. Because I." He stopped. "I do not make it easy for a person to stay." She looked at him. "You are making it easier than you think." He met her eyes, and there was the question in his again, plain and without guile, the question of a man who genuinely does not understand and is not pretending otherwise. "Why?" he said. She thought about how to answer it honestly. Because you treat me like a person who is capable of managing things, she said. Not like a thing to be managed. There are men who would have come home tonight angry that I had touched the fence, because to be glad of it would mean admitting they wanted the help. You came home and asked after my hand. She paused. That is not nothing. He looked at the table. He looked at his coffee. He looked back at her. It is the least a man can do, he said. Yes, she said. And you would be surprised how many never manage it. It was the shipping tickets that did it. She had been working backward through the ranch papers for weeks, not because anything was wrong, but because she could not sit with disorganized information when organized information was available. And by the middle of February, she had 3 years of them sorted by date in a flat wooden box she had asked Teal to bring up from town. A shipping ticket is a small thing. It records a date, a lot of animals, a gross weight taken on the pen scale at the loading yard, a tear, a net, and a price by the hundredweight. Jonas kept his own count in the ledger, head by head. In the shorthand, she had spent 2 months learning to read, and he kept a rough estimate of what each animal ought to weigh. Because a man who has run cattle for 7 years knows his own stock. On a Tuesday night with the lamp turned up, she laid 3 years of tickets against 3 years of ledger pages, and she saw it. It was not dramatic. That was what took her so long. Nothing was off by a great deal. Every single lot Jonas had sold to the Grieve outfit at the Shale Bend pens came back light against his own tally, and it came back light by between 4 and 6%, and it came back light every single time. She sat back. She checked it again. Because a woman who has grown up in a weighmaster's house does not put a thing like that in front of a man until she has checked it twice. Then she took the 2 lots he had sold elsewhere, one to a small buyer out of Terry in '84 and one to a butcher in Shale Bend the same fall, and she laid those against his tally. They matched. Within a percent either way, which is ordinary. They matched. She sat in the kitchen with the lamp burning down and her hands flat on the table on either side of the papers, and she thought about a rented room in Fargo. She showed him in the morning. She did not lead into it. She laid the 3 years out on the table in front of him in 2 columns with a strip of paper between them, and she said, "Look at the 2 columns and tell me what you see." He looked at it for a long time. He was not a fast reader of figures, but he was not a careless one either, and she watched him get there on his own, which was what she wanted. Because a man believes a thing differently when he has found it himself. "Every one," he said. "Every one to Grieve. Not the 2 you sold elsewhere." He sat back. "I have been selling to Grieve since '82, he said. "I know. I have 3 years of it here. There is more in the older box." "How much?" "Against your own tally, over 3 years, it comes to a bit over $1,100. He did not say anything for a long while. She let him have it. "It could be my count," he said finally. It could. She had been waiting for that, and she respected him for saying it. Your count could be generous, and every rancher's count is a little generous. But your count is generous by the same amount for the Terry buyer and the butcher, and those 2 tickets match. If your eye were the problem, it would be the problem everywhere. He looked at the columns again. "How do we know?" he said. "We weigh something we know," she said. They did it on a Saturday with Teal there as a witness, because she insisted on a witness, and because Teal had been hauling freight in that country for 30 years and knew every scale between the basin and the railhead. The mercantile at Shale Bend had a platform scale in the back for grain and hides. Teal had a set of iron counterpoises in his wagon that he used for freight. Nell had her father's brass. She set the brass 50 on the mercantile platform first, and the beam came up and settled at 50 1/4, which is honest for a shop scale that gets shoved around by everybody in town. Then they weighed a steer. One animal, chosen by Jonas, driven in and stood on the platform with Teal at the head of it, and the mercantile scale gave them 940 pounds. Then they walked that same animal 300 yards down the street to the loading pens and put it on the beam scale that Greaves' man used, and Pate Corrigan came out of the little office by the chute wiping his hands on his trousers and asked what they thought they were doing. "Weighing a steer," Jonas said. Corrigan looked at the animal. He looked at Jonas. He looked at Nell, standing at the rail in a gray coat with a wooden case in her hands, and something went across his face fast and was put away. "Scale is sealed," he said. "Tested last May." "Nobody said it was not," Jonas said. "Weigh him." Corrigan weighed him. He took a long time setting the poise, longer than a man does who has done it 10,000 times. And Nell watched his hands and said nothing at all. 895, Corrigan said. Jonas did not answer him. He looked at the beam for a moment, and then he turned and walked back up the street, and Teal drove the steer after him, and Nell walked behind them both with her father's case under her arm, and she did not look back at Pate Corrigan, though she could feel him watching her the whole way. 45 pounds, she said, when they were clear of the town. On one animal, that is 4 8/10%. Jonas said nothing for a quarter mile. Then he said, "My father sold to that pen. Before me." "I know," she said. "It is in the old box." Lucius Greave came up the Basin Road 11 days later with 2 men and a good horse. He was not what she had expected either. She had built something in her mind out of the word buyer, and it had been a coarse thing. And Greave was not coarse. He was 50, neatly bearded, in a coat that had been made for him, and he came into the yard with his hat already in his hand and asked after Mr. Reeler. Ridley's Winter, as though the two of them were old acquaintances who had missed each other at church. Jonas did not ask him in. "Heard you were doing some weighing," Greave said pleasantly. "We weighed a steer." "So I understand." Greave turned the hat in his hands. "Jonas, that pen scale is inspected and sealed by the territory. There is a certificate on the wall of that office. A mercantile scale in the back of a dry goods store is not a standard, and it has never been a standard, and every man in this basin knows it. You put an animal on a shop scale and got a number you liked better. That is all that happened. We used a certified 50-pound standard on the shop scale first," Nell said. Greave looked at her for the first time. He looked at her a beat longer than was polite, and then he smiled. And it was a good smile, and it did not reach anywhere. "And whose standard would that be?" he said. "Harlan Pike's." Something happened behind the smile. It was very brief. She had spent a lifetime watching men's faces for exactly that, and she caught it. "I knew a Pike," Greave said. "I know you did," she said. "He tested a scale of yours in 81. The yard was quiet. One of Greaves' men shifted in the saddle. That standard would be out of certification by, Greaves said, and appeared to calculate. 5 years. 6 in June. 6 years. He put his hat back on. "Well, then it is a piece of brass, ma'am. It is a very heavy piece of brass with a dead man's mark on it, and it is not evidence of anything. And I would hate to see a good outfit up here make a public accusation on the strength of it." He looked at Jonas. "I have bought your cattle for 4 years. I have paid on the day, every time in a country where a good many buyers do not. You are a long way out here, Jonas. A man out this far wants to think hard about who he is willing to do without." He said it pleasantly. That was the thing about it. Then he turned the horse and went back down the road, and the 3 of them stood in the yard and watched him go. "He is not wrong about the seal," Nell said. "No," Jonas said. "I know what to do about it. I do not know yet whether you will want to." "Say it anyway." "Not yet," she said. "Let me write 2 letters first." The letters took 11 days to get answers, and neither answer was what she wanted. The territorial inspector's office at Helena wrote back a courteous half-page. A sealed scale could be challenged. Yes, a challenge required a test conducted in the presence of a deputy inspector using a standard in current certification. The office had 4 deputy inspectors for the whole territory, and none of them would be east of the divide before the middle of May. As to a lapsed standard, the office noted that a lapsed seal did not by itself make a standard inaccurate. A lapsed standard could be checked against the office master and recertified, but the office could not act on a private citizen's brass and had no funds to send a man out on a complaint. The second letter was from a deputy inspector named Marlowe out of Billings, and it was 3 lines long and much more useful. "If you can get me to a pen on a day when there is a crowd," he wrote, "I will bring a certified 25, and I will test any scale in this territory in front of God and everybody, because that is my job, and I have wanted to do it at that particular yard for 2 years. But I will not come out to test a scale for one man. One man they will call a sorehead and the whole thing dies. Bring me a room full of them." She read that letter 4 times. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and started a list. She did not get to finish it that night, because that was the night Micah broke. She found him in the barn in the late afternoon, not where he was supposed to be. She had thought he was in the house. He was sitting in the hay on the far side with his knees pulled up, not crying, but near it, in the way children get when they have been holding something too long and the container is going. She sat down beside him in the hay and did not ask what was wrong. She had learned in 6 years that asking straight off often makes it worse. He let her sit there for the better part of 2 minutes. Then he said, "Roy Farrow says we do not belong here." She kept her face level. "When did you see Roy Farrow?" "Teal took me down when he went for the mail. He was outside the store. He picked at the hay. He said this is not our ranch, and we are only here because we had nowhere to go, and his pa says we will be gone by spring like the other ones." The anger that went through her was fast and cold, and she kept every particle of it off her face. "What did you say to him?" "I did not say anything. I did not know what to say." "That is all right. You do not always have to say a thing right away." "But is it true?" He looked up at her then, and his eyes were serious and afraid in the way they got when he had already worked out the answer and was hoping she would give him a different one. "Are we only here because we had nowhere to go?" Nell looked at her son. She thought about the answer carefully because he deserved the true one and not the comfortable one. "We came here because we needed a place," she said. "That is true. So did every person who ever built anything anywhere. You do not have to start with much to make something real. But do we belong? That is not a thing another person decides," she said. "Roy Farrow does not decide it. His father does not decide it. It gets decided by what we do while we are here, whether we pull our weight, whether we do what we said we would do, whether we treat the place and the people in it right." She paused. "And we do those things, do we not?" Micah thought about it. "I carry the water bucket," he said. "Both hands. You do. And I held the wire on the east fence. You did." "So we belong," he said, working it out step by step the way he worked everything out. "We belong," she said. He leaned against her side. She put her arm around him and they sat in the hay a while, which was impractical and cold and occasionally necessary. She did not hear the barn door. She did not know Jonas was there until his voice came from the other end where the horses were, level and unhurried, as though he had been there the whole time and had simply now finished what he was doing. "Micah," he said, "you want to help me break the ice on the troughs before dark." Micah sat up. He looked toward the voice. He looked at his mother. She nodded. He got up and crossed the barn to where Jonas was waiting, and she watched her son's shoulders come down as he walked, the specific unburdening of a child who has been handed, Without ceremony, the exact thing he needed. Not comfort. A job. A place in the work. She sat in the hay one more minute. Then she got up and brushed herself off and went in to start supper, because the night was coming and there was food to make and a ranch to keep. The riding took 3 weeks. Egan Marsh went first because he had the oldest outfit in the basin and the others watched what he did. He listened to Nell lay the 2 columns on his kitchen table, and he did not say a word for a long time. And then he went into the back room and came out with his own shipping tickets in a flour sack and dropped them on the table and said, "Do mine." She did his. He was light between 4 and 6% on every lot to Grieve going back to 1882. Turner and Delia Sable came next. Delia Sable looked between Jonas and Nell in the yard with a frank curiosity and then said, "Come in then." And Nell had the sense of being recognized by a woman who had spent a long while being the only woman in practical conversations. Bo and Rask took 2 visits, on account of a fence-line grievance with Marsh that was 9 years old and had nothing to do with anything. Nate Prine, who was young and carried himself like a man who expected to be outnumbered in most rooms, said he did not see why it was his business when his own tickets were his own business. "Because he does not need your tickets to be wrong," Nell said. "He needs you to sell alone. One man complaining about a sealed scale is a sorehead. 7 men with 3 years of paper are a finding." Prine was quiet. Turner Sable said, "She is right." They went to Wick Farrow last, and they went carefully, and Nell went in first and sat with Josie Farrow for half an hour in a bedroom that smelled of camphor and did not mention cattle once. When she came out, Wick Farrow was at the table with his hat in his hands, and he said, before anybody asked him anything, "I know what I owe Ridley." "You owe him 4 steers, Nell said, "and it is marked deferred with a date on it, and nobody in this basin knows but the 3 of us. That is not why we came." Farrow looked at the table for a while. "Get my tickets," he said to his son. The meeting at Antler Creek fell on a Saturday at the end of April. 7 outfits came. Teal drove 2 of the smaller men whose wagons were not up to the road. Nell had moved the furniture and cooked for 2 days. Nothing elaborate. Nothing that looked like she was performing hospitality rather than providing it, because she had learned by then that this country respected sufficiency without waste. She sat down at the table with them. She had thought about whether it was presumptuous, whether the men would take it better from Jonas alone. And she had decided that hesitating to sit at a table she had built was a kind of dishonesty she was not willing to practice. Nobody said anything about it. She laid it out in sequence. This is what your own counts say. This is what the tickets say. This is what the 2 lots sold to other buyers say, which is the control. This is what a deputy inspector named Marlowe will do if 7 outfits sign 1 letter, and this is what he will not do for 1. Marsh asked what happened if the scale came up honest. "Then we have all made fools of ourselves in public," Nell said, "and Grieve will not buy from any of us for a year, and some of you cannot carry that." She did not soften it. "I think the scale is light. I have thought so since February. But I am not going to tell you the risk is small, because it is not." Marsh looked around the table. "Sign it," he said. 6 signed that night. Rask signed on the Monday after 20 minutes with Marsh that nobody else was present for. Shipping day at the Shale Bend pens came in the 2nd week of June, and it came hot and bright, with dust standing in the air over the chutes and the noise of 1,100 head of cattle coming down out of the basin. Grieve was there in his good coat. Pate Corrigan was on the beam. Deputy Inspector Marlowe had come in on the Tuesday train with a wooden case and a manner so mild that Grieve did not appear to place him until the man walked up to the scale house at 9 in the morning with 60 men at the rails watching. Marlowe put a certified 25-pound standard on the platform. The beam came up and settled at 24.5. "Half a pound," Grieve said easily, "on a scale rated to 5,000. That is nothing. That is 2%, Marlowe said. But you are right that one weight is not a test. He looked at Nell. She came through the rail with the wooden case in both hands, because it was heavy and she was not going to pretend otherwise in front of anybody, and she set it on the platform and opened it and took out her father's brass 50 and set it on the deck of the scale, and the sound it made going down was the flat, dead sound that only solid brass makes. And the pens went quiet enough to hear it. Paddy Corrigan did not move to the beam. Mr. Corrigan, Marlowe said. Corrigan set the poise. His hands were not steady, and every man at that rail could see it, and he tried 3 times, and then he stepped back and let Marlowe do it, and Marlowe ran the poise out and brought it back and let the beam find its own level. 47.5, Marlowe said. Nobody said anything. 47.5 pounds against a 50-pound standard, Marlowe said louder for the rails. That is 5% light. And the 25 came up 2% light, which is what a scale does when somebody has been at the ratio and not at the poise. He turned around. Mr. Grieve, this scale is rejected. I am cutting the seal off it, and I am carrying the ticket book to Helena on the Thursday train. Grieve stood in the sun with his hat in his hand, and he did the only thing a man like that ever does. He calculated. She watched him do it. She watched him look at 60 men at a rail and a deputy inspector with a bag and 7 outfits with 3 years of paper and a brass block with a dead weighmaster's stamp on the side of it, and she watched him arrive at his number. He put his hat on and he walked to his buggy, and he did not say one word to anybody, and that was the end of Lucius Grieve in the Antler Creek basin. It was not clean afterward, and it was not quick. The Buyers Association pulled Grieve's certification in August. The back payments were settled at 40 cents on the dollar in October, which Marsh called robbery and Nell called money they had not had in June. Corrigan left the country. There was talk in Shale Bend for a while that a woman had done it. And then there was talk that Ridley's woman had done it. And then, by the fall, there was simply the fact that the pen scale at Shale Bend was the most honest scale in that quarter of the territory, and everybody in the basin knew why. Jonas asked her in September, at the kitchen table, with the ledger closed between them for once. I want to know if you would consider making this a real thing, he said. Not the arrangement. Not the keeping of the books. He held her eyes. I want you and the boy here, and I want it to be the actual thing. And I want you to know before you answer that the answer does not change anything about the arrangement either way. You have thought about what it means if I say no. Yes, and you are still asking. Yes, he said. Because not asking seemed worse. She thought about a platform in Miles City and a man who would not look at her. She thought about a letter with 4 blunt paragraphs and 1 true sentence in it. She thought about 3 chairs at a table set out by a man who did not know whether he was being hopeful or foolish. Yes, she said. They were married in the yard in October with Marsh and his wife as witnesses, and Teal at the fence in his good coat, wearing the expression of a man attending something he approves of and would not admit to approving of in words. Afterward, Micah looked up at Jonas with the evaluating seriousness that had characterized most of his assessments that year, and said, Are you my father now? Jonas crouched down to eye level, the way he always did when the thing mattered. I am what you need me to be, he said. That is yours to decide, and you can take as long as you want. Could I call you Jonas still? Yes. Could I call you something else later if I decided to? Yes, Micah nodded, filing it away as a decision to be made on his own schedule, and held his hand out in the solemn, formal way he had picked up from watching the ranchers. Jonas shook it. She gave him the weight in the spring. She had thought about it for months, and she did it without ceremony on an ordinary morning at the kitchen table with the wind coming down off the ridge and the door standing open. This was your grandfather's, she said. His name was Harlan Pike, and he was a weighmaster for the territory, and he was put out of his position for saying that a scale was crooked when it was crooked. He was right, and nobody ever wrote that down anywhere. She set it on the table in front of her son. "It is written down now," she said. Micah put both hands on it. It was still too heavy for him to lift one-handed, and it would be for 2 more years. "What is it for?" he said. "It is for telling the truth about how heavy a thing is," she said. "That is all it does. It is the only thing I have ever owned that could not lie." He carried it out to the porch with both arms around it, the way he had carried it that first winter, and he set it down on the ledger she had left open on the step, on the loose pages that had been lifting and turning in the wind all morning. The pages stopped moving. Nell stood in the doorway and looked at it for a while, at the brass and the paper and the boy. And behind them the basin going green in every direction, and Jonas coming up from the barn with his coat over his arm, no hat, the sun on his face. She had not been rescued. She wanted that understood, and she would say it that way in later years when people got the story wrong. She had not been saved by a man or a ranch or a turn of luck. She had come out here with $14 and a child and one heavy piece of brass, and she had read carefully, and she had counted honestly, and she had put the truth on the scale in front of everybody. That was all it ever was. And the beam came to rest, and it did not move.